Welcome to On the Brink. My name is Sean Judge. Today on the show, I sat down with Santi Alvarado, CEO and co-founder of XFX. Earlier this week, we announced Castle Island invested in XFX's seed round of financing alongside Han Ventures, Oak HCFT, Maya Capital, Coinbase, Paxos, and others. Please enjoy today's conversation with Santi Alvarado.
Matt Walsh and Nick Carter are partners at Castle Island Ventures. All views expressed by them or the guests on this podcast are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Castle Island Ventures. Guests and hosts may maintain positions in the assets discussed in this podcast. You should not treat any opinion expressed by anyone on this podcast as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or follow a particular strategy, but only as an expression of their personal opinion. This podcast is for informational purposes only.
Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
The federal government loans American International Group, AIG, $85 billion.
This is a different kind of market, and the Fed is asleep.
The federal government is stepping in to stabilize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two mortgage giants that have been threatened by the housing crisis.
The Bank of England has pumped £75 billion more into Britain's ailing economy with a new round of quantitative easing.
You print a couple $1 trillion, and all of a sudden, people start to worry. So out of this worry, we have something called the Bitcoin.
Welcome to On the Brink. My name's Sean Judge. Today I'm sitting down with Santi Alvarado, CEO and co-founder of XFX. Santi, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Sean. Pleasure to be here.
I guess just to start, it would be great if you could share your personal background and how you arrived at working in crypto.
I'm actually Peruvian, although I haven't lived in Peru for over a decade. And in what I call my past life, I did something very different to what I'm doing now. I'm a civil engineer, and I worked on infrastructure development across Latin America, mostly in energy and transportation. Then got an MBA degree at Harvard Business School. And after that is when my fintech career started. I had the opportunity to launch and scale a digital bank called Tempo in Chile. Interestingly, that's the first time I actually bought Bitcoin. It was out of frustration with my bank trying to send money back home to Peru, where I got stuck in what I call swift limbo, right? Where you don't know where the money's going to arrive, the fees that you're going to pay. Ultimately, the money ended up arriving 7 days later, and they usually charged me around $150, which I thought was unacceptable. So I opened an account at a Chilean exchange, an account at a Peruvian exchange, and I started buying Bitcoin with Chilean pesos and selling it for Peruvian soles. And it took me 15 minutes and a fraction of a cost. I thought there was something like very powerful there. Although, of course, the user experience was still a bit tricky. So I decided to create a cross-border payments business leveraging blockchain and Bitcoin specifically. Stablecoins were not a thing back then. And a friend of mine from business school, who was the CFO at Bitso, told me, why don't you join Bitso and do this business with us? So about 5 years ago, I joined Bitso to launch what was then called the cross-border payments business unit, which ended up becoming the Bitso business, which is Bitso's B2B business unit.
It's amazing. I mean, I give Bitso a lot of credit for thinking about that 5 years ago. I mean, it's obviously very in vogue today, but 5 years ago it was less obvious that this would be a huge opportunity. So you had your experience there. XFX you just raised for earlier this week, and we were proud to be investors in that round. What is kind of the high-level overview of XFX, and who did you start this with?
In a nutshell, the way that I would describe XFX is a financial infrastructure for international settlement. And what we provide is we give access to institutions to wholesale FX liquidity and real-time settlement, saving in capital costs, right? By not having to pre-fund origin or destination accounts. I started this business with my two co-founders called Jason Losh and Alberto, we call him Beto, Sanchez Tello, and we all met at Bitso. So Jason used to lead the engineering team at Bitso, and Beto led the markets team, which is basically a team that's in charge of the liquidity in the exchange for both the retail and institutional business units.
Zooming out a little bit, for those listeners that are maybe less familiar with the FX market or cross-border payments market, I think it's pretty jarring when you dig into the numbers. Can you just share just how big of a market this is and maybe how it operates today?
So the FX market is the largest financial market in the world in terms of TPV. It moves $7.5 trillion a day. And if you think about it, it makes sense because ultimately, most of financial services actually have to go through an FX transaction, right? If you're thinking about international trade, trading commodities, if you're thinking about global equities or debt, this usually have an FX transaction embedded in them. It's an absolutely massive market, but it has its complexities that I'm happy to talk about. So let's start with a settlement piece. Most people have heard about Swift, and Swift really is only a messaging system between banks. But the actual money movement happens across correspondent banks, meaning that each of these banks in that payment chain need to have what are called Nostro and Vostro accounts at each other, right? In the corresponding currency for different types of currency pairs. There are $4 trillion of tied up capital in this Nostro Vostro account. So if you actually think about the cost breakdown of the average cross-border payments transaction, around 60% is composed of the cost of capital of that tied-up capital and the FX spreads. So that's on the settlement side, right? And then on the trading side, there are also complexities, right? Usually the market, and this is very strange for such a large market, is very opaque. If you ask anyone that's engaging regularly with FX providers, they always feel like they're being taken advantage of. There's very little transparency on whether you're actually getting a competitive price. And also behind the scenes, there are settlement and cost of capital problems. For instance, if you want to trade at the spot rate in the Mexican FX market, the funds settle T+2. That also means quite a bit of working capital tied up in the system. And it's no wonder that if you want to trade from Monday to Wednesday, you can get a better rate than if you want to trade Thursday and Friday, because if you trade Thursday, the funds will settle on Monday. Therefore, there's an additional cost of capital due to the weekend.
Incredible that that's the way the market exists today in 2025.
It has largely been unchanged literally since the late 70s.
And then I guess that's where stablecoins come in. So most of our listeners will be familiar with stablecoins, but maybe in your words, why do you see stablecoins as improving upon the existing ways in which money moves cross-border? A lot of that tied up capital.
The most exciting thing for me about stablecoins is that for the first time, we have a standard that the ecosystem can agree upon and actually build according to that standard for cross-border payments, right? Not only that, but unlike Swift, which is only the messaging system, stablecoins are both things, right? They're the messaging system and the movement of value. A few relevant components that are missing for the asset class, and by asset class, I mean stablecoins, to truly deliver on its intended value proposition, which is real-time cross-border settlement without pre-funding requirements, so that it can actually outcompete the TradFi mechanisms today. That's why we're actually building XFX, because we think we can actually build that base layer infrastructure to make sure that that value proposition happens.
It makes a lot of sense. And now, were there experiences that you've had just in your journey working in fintech and eventually working in crypto where you felt like this just had to exist? It just was very obvious. And maybe just on that, if you could kind of explain in a little bit more detail who the key players are involved in a cross-border stablecoin transaction and where things were starting to break and what you guys are building to help kind of facilitate that.
Let's talk about one use case where this is very visible and where the system is broken, which are remittances and e-commerce. So on the remittance side, you have money transmitters. Those money transmitters promise their end users same-day settlement, but the money does not arrive same day, meaning that there's a gap that they need to pre-fund in order for them to actually meet their payments SLA. The same is true for a PSP that offers same-day settlement for a foreign merchant. So the foreign merchant hires the PSP to manage all the collections domestically, and then they need to settle with them, whichever jurisdiction they're incorporated in or have their bank accounts at. And the same working capital problem happens. In fact, it's actually even worse because they need to process the domestic card network, which usually settles in 2 days, and then you have the Swift problem. Depending on the origin destination, they could be pre-funding up to, let's say, 5 days of TPV. to meet their SLAs with their customers. And that actually makes no sense, right? Especially if you think about all of the real-time payment networks that are appearing in different markets like Pix in Brazil, Spain, Mexico, Fed now in the US. Why does the cross-border payment space still need to happen in batch? That's to a large degree the problem that stablecoins can get to solve. That can happen from a programmatic standpoint, but the liquidity is still not there. So the problem that we're solving at XFX is making sure that regardless of the amount that you want to trade, first, that you can do it programmatically and that you can access the most competitive liquidity consistently at all times for that asset class. Therefore, really trying to make the cross-border payments a value chain real time on a per transaction basis instead of on a batch basis.
As we've talked about a bunch, we're investors in Felix Pago. And from an end user's perspective, the digital remitters that emerged 15 years ago are able to kind of do, and I'm using quotation marks, instant payments, because for the user, it feels that way. But those digital remitters are forced to kind of park capital all over the world to facilitate that. Whereas with stablecoins, there's the opportunity to kind of actually do it instant with less capital tied up. The only issue there is there liquidity on the other end, which is kind of where you guys come into play.
And not only that, I would add an additional problem that goes beyond the parked capital. It's that all of the rebalancing has to happen in batch, and it usually happens in an analog manner, literally via a phone call or a WhatsApp channel with your relationship manager at a bank or FX provider.
Can you share, I guess, just on the product side, what does the product look like today for businesses looking to move money, and then maybe what it looks like for the FX market maker side?
There's three main product pillars in our product offering. The first is the settlement layer, where we actually give access to the domestic banking rails for the currency pairs that we want to support, as well as the stablecoin networks that we want to support. The second is the trade execution capabilities, which is an RFQ system plus the trade execution capabilities, which always happen in real time. And with full transparency, you'll always be able to audit the trade breakdown with the system. And third are the post-trade settlement capabilities, which in essence give payments institutions the ability to even improve their working capital further, where they can actually execute a trade with us and then settle T+1, T+2, or T+3.
As you guys are talking to folks in the market, are there kind of core aspects of the settlement platform that makes XFX stand out for institutional clients? Is it that post-trade settlement component?
So I'd say that the first thing is the consistency in price and depth for all the currency pairs that we support. It makes no sense to integrate to a platform that cannot deliver on that consistency and visibility for the trading. And unfortunately, that's not the case for stablecoins, particularly in less liquid markets like Latin markets. Second is the settlement speed. All the settlement happens in real time. And that equates to no pre-funding, no tied up capital. The third thing is the transparency. So if we actually agree on commercial terms, you'll always be able to audit, regardless of the mechanism and the trade size, that is the spread that you are actually getting, which is, let's say, Bloomberg market rate plus X basis points. And the third thing is the programmability, to make sure that you have the flexibility to operate either via web UI and OTC, but most importantly, that you can actually automate this whole operation via a great set of APIs.
To get going, obviously you'll have plans to expand, but here initially, what pairs do you plan to support?
We're starting with three currency pairs, which are USD fiat against MXN, USDC against MXN, and USDT against MXN. But our plan is to remain always agnostic to the stablecoin that we want to route volume through. We'll always follow the optimal path for settlement speed and liquidity. In terms of roadmap, we want to move to the rest of Spanish-speaking LATAM. We believe that the places where this technology is really 10x better than the existing TradFi alternatives is in the less liquid, more exotic markets. So we'll start there, but the idea is to build a global business.
Well, I think with this infrastructure, which will enable even more interesting business and consumer applications to get built on top of you guys, now that it's making it just that much more efficient. Well, this has been awesome, Santi. Where can people learn more about XFX and you?
You can go to our website, which is xfx.io, or follow us on X. The handle is @officialXFX.
Well, congrats again on the seed round. Super pumped to be partnered with you and the team. And thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you, Sean. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to another episode of On the Brink with Castle Island. To find out more about Castle Island, visit castleisland.vc. To listen to all of our podcast episodes, please go to onthebrink-podcast.com or just click on the tab in our website. Thanks for listening.